Hello, and welcome to the Future of Work podcast by Allwork.Space. I'm Ceci Amador de San Jose, and today I'm looking forward to chatting with Annie Rinker, Director of Workplace Services at Hines, about the changing CRE and flexible workspace landscape. Annie, welcome.
Thank you, Ceci. I'm really excited to be here today.
I'm really happy to have you. Annie is the director at Hines Workplace Services. She is responsible for the rollout and operations of their flexible office platform, including the Square, the co-working brand developed by Hines. And I want to start off by saying Hines was probably among the pioneers as a landlord to launch their own flexible workspace brand. Why?
I'd like to say that I was the one at Hines that did it, but I had honestly nothing to do with it from its inception. So I only joined Hines in 2019. And at that point, Hines was pretty far down the path of thinking through, not necessarily exactly how we were going to roll it out and what it meant for Hines, but certainly that Hines needed to take a step forward in having a more formalized flex office product. I think it's interesting. When I first started at Hines, I was within the Office of Innovation. I joined the Office of Innovation team, and it's a group still to this day that's thinking about all of the stuff that's happening in real estate today, and how technology and how we work and where we work and how buildings are built and all the prop tech that's going into this industry and all the dollars that are flowing to it. How all of that should change Hines's strategy. And so, way back in the day, Charlie Coons, who was leading the group at the time, he started to see a lot of things that were happening with WeWork. And I think specifically that all of a sudden, co-working and flex office isn't a new thing. It's been around since the 80s, but historically it was small and medium-sized businesses. And then now all of a sudden, WeWork had a number of tenants that were large tenants of our Hines global portfolio, but were seeking out this product, and Hines wasn't able to deliver. And so instead they were going to third parties. And not only were they just going to third parties for this sort of, what traditionally was thought of as flex office, but they were going, like a company like Amazon would go to an operator and they would take a couple seats and then a couple more, and then they take a floor, and then they take two floors. And instead of having a direct relationship, we lost that relationship, and we lost that touch to our customer, our client at the end of the day. And, I think Hines has, we care a lot about the buildings that we build. We care a lot about the property management team that runs the space, and we care a lot about the customers who interact with our product. And so I think the Office of Innovation did a fantastic job at the time of making a really compelling argument as to why Hines needed to get into this. And they were really futuristic at that point, not necessarily for those of us who are living and breathing co-working every day, but as a large institutional owner, developer, landlord, to say, I see the shift that's happening in the workplace, and I want to have that direct relationship with our customers, even if it means changing or making some adjustments to our product strategy, or at least adding a new product into our stack. That's something that they were really passionate about, and the innovation team was at the forefront of thinking through that. And so, fast forward, I joined the Hines team in 2019, and at that point there were a couple locations that they had identified, two of which we opened in 2020. But I think for Hines, it's always been about the experience. It's always been about putting our customers at the forefront of how they interact with our buildings. And I think landlords historically have not necessarily thought about everybody who's setting foot into their product type. But I think Hines is really starting to shift, and started to do so back when they were co-working on how they really push this product into the future, and how we can be more engaging with our customers as a result.
And I have to say that Hines did a great job. You guys were pioneers in that sense, and I think it's paid off, especially now that we're seeing a lot of landlords kind of embrace the flexible workspace model. And then part of the reason why it was surprising that Hines did this so early on is because at the time, landlords were still skeptical about kind of like going into business with co-working operators. It wasn't the most solid of business models. So how did Hines approach this? And I know you guys have championed management agreements with Industrious, and that's been a great partnership, and it's helped grow Industrious and Hines co-working offering as well. What can you tell us about the landlord perspective of why this partnership model works and why it was better to partner with a co-working space operator versus just doing it on your own?
Yeah, so I will say that we've started to see some shifts in how we think through this. So again, well before my time, our Office of Innovation identified several really key operators in this space that were doing, a fantastic job from a growth standpoint, that they had, the experience and the hospitality elements that Hines really considers to be a core product of what we offer through our property management. And so Industrious was one of the companies that we identified through an RFP process early on in thinking through this. And we knew we wanted to bring them on as an operator. So they were part of the operation for our first 2 locations. They're still operating our location in Salt Lake City through the Industrious platform. We call it the Square with Industrious. And the intent is that we created a white labeled product, basically an in-house product, the Square, and where we need to use partners, we certainly will partner with a solid operator. As we continue to scale globally, it might not make sense for us to operate all of these locations in-house, but we have shifted our strategy, and a lot of that, frankly, had to do with COVID and a lot of the things that we've seen over the last 19, 20 months. But we have shifted away from a partnership model, and we are bringing operations in-house, and are doing so at one location, and the next 2 locations that we are opening will be through an in-house operation. I think we'll probably look at sort of an in-house first model, but certainly not exclusive to in-house. We are still open to partnering, like I said, where it makes sense to do so. And I think that's something that Hines has always done really well, is that we enjoy partnerships where it makes sense. And if we think that the model is more appropriate and makes sense for us to bring in house, then we'll figure out how to do that as well.
And so you had Hines. You've seen both sides of the coin. So what can you tell us about the benefits and disadvantages of each model, like doing it in-house versus partnering with a third party?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that we went into lightly. It took a lot of time and research for us to sort of think through how we build it out. I think, each larger landlord is going to be different. A lot of it has to do with the capital partners that we work with at each of our different projects. And I think, we're 100% in agreement that the management model is the right path forward. I think that what we've seen, especially in COVID, is that the traditional leasing model, in the good times, the operator is taking all the upside. And in the bad times, the landlord's taking a lot of risk from an operator walking away. And so we are fully in agreement that the management agreement is the best approach forward, that it aligns the operator with the landlord. I think what we've seen, though, is bringing operations in-house further solidifies that alignment, because it is truly what we are doing is best for the asset rather than for the sort of the operational component of the co-working space. And so what I mean by that is, we might have a building where we make a decision to do something that might, hinder the margins that we're able to achieve in the co-working space. But at the end of the day, if we're adding exponential value through the building itself, then that is fundamentally a much bigger play for Hines. It helps, I think, our capital partners, which is extremely important to us. At the end of the day, we consider ourselves to be fiduciary managers. And so we want to always look at what's the best strategy. How can we add the most alpha to our operation? And having an in-house operation that allows for us to be extremely flexible in the truest sense of the word, including how we operate and deals that we might do to support leasing strategies or asset strategies, it makes the most sense. But, again, we didn't start off that way. And I'm not saying that we will forever, from this day forward, be in a self-management situation. I think, for us, we did a lot of evaluating of what a platform would look like for us to bring operations in-house. And, frankly, for most owners and landlords, it doesn't necessarily make sense
Yeah.
because the scale that you have to pay for sort of the operating platform. And if you think about some co-working metrics in terms of an operation, you might have anywhere between 20 to 40% margins and really strong operating locations, and some that aren't so good, you'll have between 10 and 15. And then there might be some operations that are losing money. And so for us, we had to look at what our corporate overhead was going to be by us bringing operations in house. And by the time you pay for a staff and the software and the marketing and the operations to support multiple locations, what did it mean from us for a growth standpoint? But it was something that Hines was willing to sort of create. Like, my division is almost like it's not a profit center necessarily. We are intentionally designed to add an operational component to our property management stack that will help support the asset strategy as a whole and add co-working operations on, knowing that there are a lot of components that we need to think through and divisions that we need to create to support co-working operations, because it is fundamentally much different than property management. But by us having that strategy and not necessarily looking at the yield that we can achieve on one specific co-working floor, but rather the amount of value that we can add to a building by having this operation, it's something, again, that Hines was willing to sort of go in headfirst and keep pursuing.
And I remember, speaking about the value of a building, I think it was a couple of years ago, 2019, and I believe it was CBRE, but I'm not entirely sure. And they did some research and they concluded that having a certain percentage of a building be co-working, it could increase property value by about 20%. I don't know if that's sort of kind of like the same number that you guys have found. And like you said, COVID has changed the CRE landscape dramatically, and you guys need to be more flexible. And I think that's kind of like the key core concept of moving forward, future of work, whatever the new normal will be, is that it has to be flexible. And a lot of that has been spoken about companies and they being able to kind of like sign shorter leases and stuff like that. But I do think that in the CRE industry, which has been known to be a little bit slow in adopting new technologies and welcoming kind of like innovative approaches, I think that the flexible workspace offering is increasingly becoming very, very valuable for landlords and property owners.
Yeah.
And so I guess, Annie, what I want to get at is, how do you see the CRE industry and large property owners kind of like leveraging this new flexible offering in the future? There's been a lot of talk about hybrid working, satellite offices, and the exodus from city centers. So how does flexible workspace, whether it's in-house or through a third party, how does it impact? How will it change the CRE landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of noise out there, a lot of statistics that you can point to. I think one of the things that we thought was, there's a lot of research that we've done in this space, and one of the big things that we noticed from a research standpoint, and this I think came from the PwC US remote work survey, but basically 87% of US firms expect to make real estate strategy changes in the next 12 months as a direct result of the COVID pandemic. And so what Hines wanted to do is be in a really great position to capture some of that change that happens. And I think, as it relates to the CBD, as it relates to office space, I am big on the camp that office space is not dead. I am big on the camp that flexibility from the standpoint of being able to work in different places at different times is here to stay. And I think that it's just going to change the strategy that institutional portfolio managers are going to have to look at, or that enterprise portfolio managers are going to take for their teams, because people, we've even seen it just hiring new associates in different organizations. We've heard that if you don't offer flexibility, then you are not going to attract them. And I think this word flexibility and this concept of it is interesting, because when I say that, I'm not talking about having a co-working strategy. I think that that's sort of like one piece of it. Yeah. But the point is that enterprise organizations and even small startup, medium-sized businesses, they need to realize that what's happened over the last 18, 19 months has dramatically shifted how and where people want to work. We recently interviewed a bunch of interns that were in working for Hines over the summer, and everybody was on the bandwagon of the 3-day work week. And I think that what I found for myself personally, I'm in the office today, but I think I'm in the office, I'd say 4 days a week, and I like 1 day a week where I sort of heads down with work. That's me personally, and that's the biggest thing here, is that it's such a dramatic shift and it's such a personal experience. And I think companies need to recognize that there's not this prescriptive one size fits all on how we work anymore. And that they need to have a portfolio strategy that's supportive of that. And so that's sort of the approach that Hines is taking. I think you will see a compression in the amount of space that people take. But I think what's going to be really interesting is, if you think historically, a company needed 20,000 square feet of office space, and now they only need 10,000 square feet. Well, if they have, the same budget, they can afford, to have extremely beautiful, really, really well-positioned space, so that when their teams are coming into the office, it's just this incredible experience. And I had a conversation the other day with somebody, and I was like, I feel like everything's so cyclical, and I feel like my life is like that right now, because, when I started off in co-work 2006, we had to think of really interesting ways to get people to come into our offices, because it was a serviced office back then, an executive suite, whatever you want to call it. But we were working with primarily small and medium-sized businesses that had options to work. They could work from home or they could work from a Starbucks, and both of those were free options. And so we had to attract them into our space by having the best customer service in the industry, and having really great coffee, and having really spectacular hospitality elements, and really beautifully designed spaces, and really spectacular internet, and all these different things. And now I feel like that concept is being applied to a full building, where now property owners and landlords and managers are thinking, well, how can I have, and even portfolio managers for the enterprise occupiers are saying, like, how can I attract people back into the office? And I think that it's a lot of those same elements that made co-working what it is today, that we're now just looking to apply on a larger scale to a full building. But it's again, it's not something that is necessarily new. I think it's just shifting the mindset for a developer and a landlord. And so, that company that had 20,000 feet, now they might have 10,000 feet. That's just like the best office space ever. And people are going to want to go to it at least a couple days a week. And so I think, you're going to see a pretty big hit in Class BC office space, but some of the premier, development projects in the CBDs, I think, will still survive. It's just going to be a rethinking of how space is utilized.
I have to agree with you that I'm on camp. The office is definitely not dead. But I do think that companies will have to make it very appealing for people to want to go back, kind of like destination workplace. And I do think that amenities will play into that, and, amazing design. And you just touched on a point that I wanted to bring up, which is vacant space in CBD areas, especially as more people move to hybrid work, and if companies start to open satellite offices in more suburban residential areas. Do you think, and you just mentioned that grade B, grade C buildings are likely the ones that will experience the most vacancies. Do you think this space will be repurposed in any specific way? Do you think they're just going to make upgrades and kind of like try to convert it into a Class A type of environment? What do you see happening in that specific area of the CRE landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you can take a B building that's in a really great position or location within a city, really near transit, really high walkability scores, close to parks, restaurants, et cetera. But it just needs maybe some redesigning, and you can reposition that asset and adding some of these elements in, and all of a sudden you are looking at something that is at least a B plus, A minus building. And I think, that's a really interesting concept, because a lot of, we've been in this like amenities race for, years now, with different building owners throwing a ton of money at gyms and lobbies and lounges and all these, high quality amenity spaces for occupiers. And the big question is, well, who starts paying for that? And I think that what co-working can potentially do is start to provide this concept of a monetized amenity, because historically speaking, in the amenities arms race, a landlord would build out a conference center, and they would take the rent that they want, or some type of common area maintenance, and charge that back to the tenants, and it's adding to the core factor. But I think that there could be a world now where what co-working has done really well is they figured out how to monetize this like high quality amenity. And if we can apply that concept to not only co-working, but the conference centers and everything that are sort of going into spaces, all of a sudden you have the same lobby and lounge for tenants, and you've got the conference facility for tenants as well, but we're monetizing it through bringing in people from the outside, that you're able to generate a return on that space that is equal to, if not higher than, a traditional, the NER that you'd achieve through a market rent scenario. And I think that that is something that is going to start happening a lot more, that instead of just building out sort of like these mausoleum type lounges that aren't being utilized, you need to have like an active programming strategy behind that. And that comes through the personnel. It comes through a lot of the engagement and activities that happen in a traditional co-working sense. And so if you now have that lounge that is built out, but it's also part of a co-working lounge, and the conference rooms are available for tenants, but they're also available through the co-working operation, and we're maximizing occupancy and revenues through a marketing and leasing strategy to bring people in that normally wouldn't have access to that space. I think it kind of changes how we look at buildings. And so now that Class B building not only has these amenities, but we're able to generate rents that they normally wouldn't be able to achieve in that type of space, by sort of deploying both strategies, not just the amenities, but the monetization of those amenities.
And speaking about the amenities, Race, and you mentioned gyms, and I think gyms were all the hype not too long ago in buildings. Do you see that changing as a result of COVID?
No, I honestly, I think that you're going to see a lot more high quality gyms going into office spaces. I think there's going to be a huge focus on wellness in the future, especially in the higher quality buildings. I think, people are going to start asking about the filtration systems that we have in our buildings, which is not something that would have ever happened before. It's going to be part of the leasing tours that, we'll, talk specifically to, to some of the inner workings and the engineering components of a building that nobody really cared about historically. I think that's honestly a huge benefit of Hines, is that, Gerald Hines, was basically an engineer, and he's always cared about, he built his company caring about the bones and the infrastructure of a building. And he wanted to design beautifully designed buildings, but he wanted the internal components to be really high quality, not only for, the fact that it, at the end of the day saved the building money and added value to the building, but it was a huge thing that he thought was important for our customers, that they had the highest quality, sort of products that went into our buildings. And so, all that to say, I think that gyms are going to be really important. I think that this whole concept of wellness and the amount of natural light and the amount of airflow that we have, and even down to plants that we have in our buildings, and the availability of outdoor space, like, it's only going to continue to be something that is more and more important with tenants.
I have to agree. I'm a big fan of the wellness movement within the workplace, and I think everything comes with the good and the bad. And I think one of the good things that have come out of COVID is that people are being more aware of all of this, and with the buildings. And so the elevators, the stairs, I feel like we can say goodbye to like stairs being kind of like very far behind, these very ugly kind of thing, just like in case of emergency. I agree that gyms are probably going to stick around. But then I also think that there's an important component to the amenities and to creating this kind of like amazing workplace experience that ties back to the available technology. And it's part of wellness, like natural lighting, but also temperature. And so the Internet of Things and sensors. What do you see the role of technology being moving forward? Do you think that we're going to see the CRE industry being kind of more actively incorporating and adopting kind of all of these available technologies? Do you think that they're going to contribute to a better workplace experience? What's kind of like the landlord perspective on that?
Well, it's interesting. One of the great things about the Square is that it's not only our branded co-working product, but it's also an R&D facility for us to think through a lot of those different things that are rapidly evolving, frankly, in the world and in CRE. So, I'm at our Houston location today, and we have about 150 sensors coming from, I think, 7 different sensor companies. And so we're constantly tracking utilization and occupancy, and, even down to counting door swings in the restroom so that we can deploy our cleaning crew, not just every 2 hours, but actually like based on utilization. And so I think that there's a lot that can happen. I think the interesting thing though is there's, like I said, prop tech is such a big thing. Hines has an entire team in our Office of Innovation that's constantly thinking through how we should deploy this and looking at the technology and how quickly it's changing. But I think it's the question of how much of this is on the landlord versus how much of it is on the client or the tenant. Because there's I think a lot of technology that we can put into our buildings that will make the building smarter and better and more efficient. But then there's also technology, kind of for technology's sake, which doesn't necessarily add value. And so that's something that's probably going to be more on the occupier side. Again, I think it just depends on what technology it is and what the purpose of it is. A great example is, there's so much happening right now, I think, with tenant experience apps, but almost what's happening faster is that occupiers themselves, at least the larger ones, are starting to deploy their own apps. And so as buildings are starting to think through what their tenant engagement app strategy is and should be, all of a sudden now we've got this sort of another layer to add to it, which is the larger occupiers have their own. And so if we have now a building app where you can book resources and look at different things, and now the tenants also have an app, it's like, how do those two play together? And I think that it's just something that you constantly have to think through and evolve, which is hard. I mean, we're building our global headquarters that we're going to be launching in Q1 of next year. And it's a project that, started to develop 5 years ago. And probably has been thought of for 10 years. And so if you think about 5 years ago where technology was, and even when we started, the concrete pouring, which I don't even think I was here when it happened. So it was 2019. It's like technology is already so far in advance of where we are that you have to think about these buildings and add in these different elements, but constantly evaluate what we should be doing, how we should be thinking about it. And I think that, for Hines, at the end of the day, there's plenty of technology out there that needs to happen, that I think from an engineering standpoint fundamentally can change our buildings and bring a lot of value to both our financial partners as well as our client partners. But you've got to have a team. Again, that's why Hines has an Office of Innovation, because they're a super, super smart group that are constantly thinking about these things and calling out areas that we need to continue to evaluate and could add value to our enterprise as a whole.
And I have to say that I agree that the rate at which technological advances have been made is a bit overwhelming.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something very, very important, and I think it's how technology can help you design better spaces. And I think that's really where the value is for landlords. So you just talked about Annie, counting how many times a bathroom door is opened and closed, and it seems small, but it's kind of like those details I feel that will make for a much better workplace experience. It's about the seamless experience where every single touch point is improved upon. And I do think that technology can help buildings and property owners stay flexible, especially if they know how to incorporate that technology into their buildings, or more importantly, if they know how to analyze and use the data that they gather.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. I think people are looking at sensors and how can they solve things. But the thing is, there's so much data that you can collect in a building, but it's worthless unless you have a plan on how you plan on utilizing that data. And so for us, all the data that we're collecting on utilization here, it needs to be a way for us to build better product into the future, or provide a better service, or do something with that data that we're collecting. Otherwise, it's very expensive to collect it. It can be very valuable if you use it right, but if not, then it's just an expense that is unnecessary.
I completely agree. And then you also talked about who pays for what. And I do think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I do think that tenants are willing to pay a premium for better spaces that are well designed, that have the right technology in place. And I think co-working is proof of that. I
Yeah,
mean, in the long run, if you look at like the monthly expenses of co-working, well, yes, it's short term, so you don't need as much initial capital investment, but in the long run, it can be a lot more expensive. But companies and individuals, they're willing to pay for that for a reason. And
yeah,
so I think moving forward, we're going to see a lot of that. And I think that's going to kind of like force landlords to, I don't know, stay on their toes and be nimble and willing to adopt and implement new technologies and new lease models.
yeah. Well, I think that's it. Like if you think about just technology and lease models, so I'm a big fan of the Square and our product. It's but I don't think it's the only way that we can look at flexibility. So like, I think that the whole thing, and I've said this before, that it's a spectrum of flexibility, and so not
Yeah.
every single landlord should deploy some sort of co-working strategy in their space. It really depends asset to asset, ownership stack to ownership stack. But what needs to happen is they need to provide at least more flexibility through a different leasing model, through a spec suite program that also adds in some other elements. And I think that that's another big piece of it, is that if you build out a 2,500 square foot spec suite, the type of tenant that's attracted to that is not going to be interested in a 7 to 10 year lease, and they have to figure out the technology and the furniture. Like, you need to take it to the next level and provide the furniture. It needs to be turnkey, and it needs to be on a short form lease. And I think that that's the big thing, is that we sort of deploy a multi-step approach, where it's like one product is that true flexibility, where you're looking at maybe like 1 to 3 years max, and you have to have different products for individuals that are also for larger enterprise companies for 25 to 50 people. But then you sort of have that 3 to 5 year plan, where it's like a more of a short form lease, but it is service. And then from there, you can sort of step up to the next. And then there's sort of like the more traditional leasing model. But, even if you're not sort of starting at the low end of the spectrum, landlords out there need to understand that at least that middle range of flexibility is something that companies really want right now. And there's a ton of research out there about how quickly enterprise are shifting, and it just makes it really difficult to lock into longer term leases. But it's hard, because that's how our buildings are valued, right? They're valued
Yeah.
on a fixed income. It's like, what is real estate? Real estate is like money in, time period hold, money out.
Yeah.
And so when you start messing with that sort of fixed income scenario, it changes a lot from a capital market standpoint, which I think there's still a lot of wrestling about what that is going to do to real estate as a whole. But again, I'm not suggesting that all leasing scenarios in the future are going to be flexible. I'm just saying that instead of it being 90% long term, I think that's going to start shrinking down, where you're going to have maybe 50% long term, 25% that is sort of midterm flex, and 25 that's sort of short term flex. And but it's it fundamentally changes a lot that real estate has been built upon. So it's a lot to think about, and a lot to just consider, especially when you start adding in things that have shifted as a result of COVID, and people saying that the office is dead, which again I don't agree with. But it again, there's a lot that you can sort of look to that's happening right now in real estate.
I have to agree. I think, and it's still surprising to me that people say the office is dead. Like, I could believe that, the first 2 months we were into the pandemic. But then, like, once the 3 month mark came, I feel like people were starting to see the struggles of working from home. And the office is definitely not dead. And I think that's something that people need to realize. And I agree that it's on an individual basis. So you like going 4 days a week. I feel like we shouldn't ascribe like a particular number. I know that an
Yeah,
average is likely to be 3 days a week, but I can say, I don't know, like, I like working from home,
yeah.
but if I had access to an office really nearby, I could, maybe some weeks I'd go every single day, depending on how much I need to get done, versus another week just going once a week. Um, but I do think that the concept of flexibility is definitely what people like, kind of like you need to pin it to the top of your priorities. Like, this is what you need to be thinking, how to remain flexible and resilient. Annie, we're almost running out of time here. So if you could think of three, not necessarily trends, but shifts that you're seeing in the CRE landscape, and as a result of COVID or as a result of just natural technological advances, what could they be?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of touched on a number of them. I think that the concept of sort of Class A buildings being a more prevalent leasing scenario for companies into the future. I just think that people are still going to want to have headquarters, and they're still going to want to have office environments for their people. I just think that there's more opportunity now for those to be in Class A buildings than ever before, and that's going to be more of a desirability, for the type of quality. It's just a flight to quality, which I think we're going to continue to see. I think the second thing is, and I don't even know if we've touched on this yet, but I think, their management fees are 100% here to stay. I'm a big believer in that, from the flex office world. I think that COVID has accelerated the need for agile workspace, and that with what's happening with third party operators as a result of COVID, especially as we continue to potentially push this return to office down with the Delta variant. I think that it's even more so that management agreements are here to stay. But I think what we're going to see is that there's going to be this like compression in fees. So, if you look at an operator right now, they might, be taking anywhere from 5, I've seen all the way up to 12% from a operating model. So as their management fee, they're taking 5 to 12%. That's kind of like top line. And so they could still be making money with an operation losing money, especially during a ramp period or in a scenario like COVID. So I think what we're going to see is fee compressions. If you think about in America, a property management contract is, between 2 and 3%. And so I think you're going to start to see that management fee compress to be more in line with a property management fee, which I think is going to shift a lot from an operator standpoint, because again, they're reliant on those fees. You're reliant on, first and foremost in a leasing scenario, sort of that lease arbitrage where you're taking, the rent differential. And now in a management agreement, you're not taking any of those sort of upside scenarios, but you are dependent on fees. And now if those fees are compressing, I think it's going to be really hard for a lot of operators. So it's just something for us to watch in this industry. But I think, those are some of the big things. And I think the big thing is this monetization of amenities, rather than just building out amenity spaces. How can they start to add value? And, when we look at buildings to underwrite, we always look at an NER premium that we're able to achieve. And if we can start layering on elements where you don't have to build out a standalone a lounge or lobby area for tenants. You don't have to build out a standalone conference center, but we can sort of compact that into the operation of the co-working space, and monetize that. Then I think it's something that could be really interesting, and we'll see a lot of changes happening.
Amazing. Thank you, Annie, so much for taking the time to chat with us today. And thank you, everyone, for tuning into the Future of Work podcast by Allwork.Space. Remember, you can tune in on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. New episodes released every Thursday.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.